Quigley, who is an artist and sculptor who does a lot of work in the tabletop game space. Used to be freelance, but then got scooped up because she's just that good, right?
You flatter me. Thank
I
you.
know. That's my job. So we're gonna spend a little time talking about you before you get into your talk about zooming out the business of art for board games. We're gonna let some people get into the feed, and hopefully we'll have some questions. It'll be great. So I see some people watching. That's wonderful. Welcome, welcome, welcome. If you want to ask questions of Tatiana, please just put them in the feed. Tatiana does have a whole presentation ready, so she's going to give it, and then at the end we'll do Q&A, and I will go back and cycle through the questions that you have come up with throughout the whole presentation. Okay. So we'll give Tatiana probably like 35, 40 minutes to talk. I'll open up the floor to questions, and I'll go back through the comments that you generate and find questions there. If you want to ask questions, that'd be wonderful. It really does help. So before we get started, Tatiana, can you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, why are you into gaming, what made you start, all that good stuff?
Oh yeah. So my name's Tatiana. My pronouns she, her. I got into board games. My parents are nerds. So I was like exposed at a very early age to like all kinds of anime, like imported, fresh off like new stuff. And like PC games that were based on board games. So as I got older, I'd started to recognize that, you know, the things I liked in video games, what I was actually liking was like turn-based strategy gaming. So
Because it's the best.
because it's the best, and you've got I love like physicality and working with my hands and the physical components and everything. So kind of when I realized that the only thing I was good at was drawing, when I graduated high school and I was trying to like get into the art game, you know, I was applying to every single job in the Metroplex, and I found one that was like, hey, do you like to play board games? Like, we have the perfect opportunity for you. And it just kind of like the stars aligned, and I kind of got into that. And then as I met more people like Sen and Daniel Zayas from Tabletop Backer Party and Long Pack, and I started to meet all these amazing people who are super supportive and gave me these opportunities, and kind of built my career working with all these awesome people. And now I still work on games, but it's I can't talk about it. But I work
secret games.
Yeah, they're
toys.
secret games that are toys, and hopefully I can share some of that stuff with you guys. But as part of my talk, I have turn-based strategy gaming is just the top.
It's the best. And you've also worked with Nicholas, as have I, on a turn-based strategy board game.
One of my favorite people to work with, for sure.
Yeah, Nicholas is awesome. And what game was that?
That was on Adventure Tactics, which is just a great like big box like campaign game. I got to do all these sculpts. I'm a huge fan of Jacob Croft, who's the illustrator, and so I would drop everything to work with him. Like, I've done it on some other projects too, and he's really awesome. So
that's great.
I'm just someone who's always psyched to be working with everyone.
Why we all like working with you or want to work with you, because you're just so energetic and positive about the work, even when you're not.
Sometimes
let me tell you, there's been times when you're not, but you're still pretty. You bring a vibe. You bring a vibe to the game, which is great. And so Nicholas made Adventure Tactics through Laterman Games. Tatiana did the sculpting, and it's a wonderful system. I've done expansion for it, not an expansion, but a scenario for it. So all of us, it's great. Other things, Jacob is also the best. You are true. That is true, Nicholas. Can I ask you, Tatiana, which turn-based strategy game would you like recommend to anybody who has never played a turn-based strategy game?
Oh my gosh, that's a good question. For video games?
Yeah. Specifically video games.
I'm trying to think. So my favorite, so I always have played them, but my favorite still is probably Divinity Original Sin 2.
Wow.
It's a lot. It's a mouthful. But I think it just added so much to that genre of video game. I mean, I probably would like this even in a board game, but there's like layers of extra positioning strategy and like surface combination, and they just added a lot more like punchy video gaminess to it, I guess. So if you've never experienced the genre before, which can be pretty dry or based entirely on tabletop rule sets like the Pathfinder games, which I also love, that one is a little bit more it's got the ba boom, I guess. And then you can,
Nicholas was talking
barrelmancy.
about
Yeah,
barrelmancy.
it's important. You put the barrels in your pocket and you throw them, and it just works.
You just throw those barrels.
You throw them.
So yeah, there's a lot of really cool turn-based strategy games. I've been particularly enamored with Into the Breach.
Love Into the Breach.
Love Into the Breach, and they have new mechs because Netflix, and so there's some cool stuff out there. And I like turn-based strategy because it lets me put it down and think. Whereas a lot of the twitchy games, so Matt Felucci has said, "Hey, you got a Steam Deck? Why don't you get Vampire Survivor?" And it's only a 14-minute game at the most, or 30 minutes actually, probably at the most.
Right,
but it's super addictive, and you can't put it down because you're I could die any second. So totally different style of gaming. Oh wow, that's very timely. David is saying that Divinity 2 is on sale this weekend on GOG, so go get it if you'd like to try a turn-based
pay too much
game.
attention to what I say, you might think that I'm a spokesperson for Lariat Studios. I swear I'm not. I just love them so much.
so much. All right. So I think we've got some people watching. Why don't we get started into the presentation, and we can talk about elf ears later.
Well, I mean, you say that, but
I know. All right.
All right. So this is my zooming out, the business of art for board games. I like just the ideology of zooming out. I think on these projects, it's so easy to get into the details and lose sight of what is most important, which is the game, if you're making a board game, and the end user, which is the player. So I just kind of want to focus on how I handle the zooming out in this process a little bit. Hopefully I've done that here. So yeah, what does that even mean? Today I'm focusing on the practical side of commercial art projects, trying to see the bigger picture, making sure your game is at the center of all the design choices you make. I'm going to talk a little bit about being a commercial artist. I'm hoping that even if that's not exactly what you're trying to do, maybe that perspective will be good as you are working with and hiring artists. I want to make sure you get the most bang for your buck and treat artists fairly. We're people. We have a lot of experience. I think it took me 12 years of practicing my craft before I was at a skill level where I could make money. So that's priced in a lot of the times. It's not just about the hours, but it's also about the expertise and the craftsmanship and everything. I'm going to talk some very dry. I'm trying to make it fun. There's some memes sprinkled in. I'm going to talk a little bit about some factory specifications and how you can get that information earlier to save you money and waste less time and make artists working with you more. And just the future of art for board games, what's going to happen? Are robots going to take all of our jobs? That kind of thing. I don't know the answers to any of those questions, but we can pontificate. I talked about this a little bit. I got my anime elf. That this is important to any conversation about my backstory, because it was kind of how I started drawing. Is just I'm a big reader, so I'd read a lot of fantasy books that I'd steal from my mom's bookshelves, some of which I was way too young to actually read, like all the Octavia Butler's, Genesis books. And I read Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. And I'd start drawing elves just in the margins of all my sketchbooks and stuff at school. And at some point I stopped paying attention completely and just drew and all the time, which gave me some bad habits, but also made me a pretty good draftsman, pretty fast sketcher, which was good. I put some of my favorite video games that kind of helped me get into board games, which was I played a lot of Warcraft 2, Warcraft 3. I still, even to this day, will repeat Warcraft 2 orc noises to myself, just ready to work, that kind of thing. And then Baldur's Gate is such a huge influence for me as just a D&D fan and role player. And being a role player is actually a pretty good habit to have as an artist and as a designer, and you're writing characters and you're drawing them and you're sort of trying to think through their process. So I think role playing is actually a useful companion hobby to that profession. And then I just put some of my favorite board games that always come off my shelf and onto the table. Arkham Horror is probably the game that I always pull out. I don't know why. Maybe I just really like the tone of it. I tend to like those really thematic games, but these are my favorites that I always play. A little bit about my work life. I talked about this already some. I got hired at Goliath Games. I started as a graphic designer, and then I started as a graphic design intern making prototype boxes, which was really cool, just kind of seeing how all that stuff was built. I think at the time I found every new aspect of making games exciting, even though I was making a lot of children's games, which you'll see on some of the later slides. I didn't put a lot because sometimes things don't go forward, and I try not to break any rules sharing work. But I started making cutting boxes with razor blades, with X-Acto blades, and assembling them for showrooms. And then later I started working on graphic design. Then I started doing illustrations as I became a better illustrator and more consistent. And then as I was doing that, I was getting my degree in 3D animation. So I learned ZBrush and some other stuff, some all the animation stuff. And then that skill set ended up kind of working in with the fact that I was working on board games. So I ended up moving into product design. So I've worked with Letterman and Zucchini People, Goliath, Asmodee, Netflix, MGA is the company I work at now, Copper Frog, and then a bunch of tiny publishers. I'm really excited about this hobby. So I still, even to this day, will take little jobs helping people with Kickstarters and stuff, just because, I have a passion for this and I can't quite extricate myself fully, even though I should. I'm going to say a lot of stuff here that is my experience and has worked for me. Know that your mileage may vary with some of these things, and if you disagree, don't hesitate to bring that up later. I love feedback and critique, and I think that's what has helped me get to where I am. So I love to hear your perspective if you disagree. But hopefully there's some good advice in here. So here, I pulled a smattering of some of the work that I've done for Goliath. I've done way, way, way more stuff, but I don't want to make this all about me because that's not what this is about. My favorite thing to do there was these skill and action game redesign or fully sculpting. So I did the redesign for Pop the Pig. I did Chomp and Charlie, the sculpts. There's a game called Pikahoot where I did all the concept art for and the initial CAD and some other stuff. And then this game that is a raccoon that comes out of a dumpster, which I did right before I left, which is really fun. It's called Dumpster Diver. And then I did a lot of packaging work there. But most of my favorite stuff is still under NDA. So, but Galactic Quest is cute. And I worked on lots of tiny aspects of games when I was there, which is great for learning. So I worked on, sometimes I would just change the legal lines or update the Wheel of Fortune puzzles or make unique die lines, stuff like that. All these strange jobs that at the time you're like, why am I doing this? But as you sort of build your knowledge base, you're like, oh, actually, that was really cool. Now I know how to make all these things. This is a bunch of samplings from Adventure Tactics, Adventures in Alchemy, which should be shipping later this year, maybe, or next year, which I'm pretty excited for. But these are some of the sculpts they did. I'm really grateful for this opportunity because I think it really gave me a chance to show what I could do as a sculptor. And I think that, my career has been just little steps of people giving me a shot for things that I may not have been fully qualified to do at the time. So kind of, I think often about how the reason why I am where I am is because of those people, and it keeps me humble and grounded. So I just want to mention that. And that was a really fun project. And then I just have some designs. I worked with Longpack on their sample kit. I've always been an illustrator. I think I'm a drawing person first. So, and I love to come up with characters and kind of unique ideas and draw expressive people. So just threw that in there so you guys could see. And before I get into the game design specific thing, I just wanted to put this tips for breaking in case any artists ever see this. I have a standard thing that I think works for everyone, or for the most part. It's going to be different based on if you blow up on social media or you do a certain style, or if you know 3D or more technical work. But there's some general steps. So this is my theory of how to become a professional artist, which is just be pretty good. You don't have to have 1 million followers. You don't have to be on the front page of ArtStation. You just have to be kind of at an intermediate level where you can make representational art. You have a pretty good style. You're not letting perfect be the enemy of good. You have a sampling of 10 images that are pretty finished. Don't just have half finished sketches or anything, but just 10 or maybe even less, but they all should be finished and in a coherent style. That's it. Doesn't have to be perfect. Your anatomy doesn't have to be 100%, just pretty good. Make sure, so once you have 10 things, make sure that everyone that could possibly see those 10 things can see them. So post them everywhere. Post it to art pages, Facebook groups, ArtStation, Behance, Instagram. Network as much as you possibly can. You're already doing that by like showing up to these talks and being part of mentorship programs. If you can safely do so, go to conventions and contact, like make meetings with publishers. If you feel uncomfortable doing that, do it online. Try to be the master of your own destiny as much as you can. This isn't a fair industry at all. So sometimes there will be people that can kind of see your potential and elevate you, and that I think that's becoming more of a thing as there's like kind of a force for inclusivity in our industry, which I think is such a good thing. But you really have to advocate for yourself and be confident, which I know is really hard. But do your best. Once you have one shipped thing, you have a relationship with one publisher, you've finished the game, it's at the factory, it's on the shelf, it's a box in your hands, you will find that it becomes so much easier. And this is true for designers too. Really just getting that first project under your belt is like the hardest hill to climb, but then from there it's all gravy. Well, it's not all gravy, but it's a lot easier. And then just charge enough money. I put some numbers here because I think people don't put numbers enough to things when they do these kind of presentations. And I found that really confusing. So I'm trying to just, spitball. Like if I see one of my friends charging less than $25 or $30 an hour, I tell them to stop, because they've spent almost a decade working on this craft, and that should be priced in. It's not the same as any other entry level job. There's so much more training. Just you're worth it. Take care of yourself. This is also a little bit true when you're pricing your games and thinking about that down the line. There's a lot more than just the cost of materials that you have to think about. All right, here we go. So we're getting into the meat and potatoes. I'm not going too fast, which is good. Now I'm kind of worried I'm going to go too long, but that's fine. That's better. Okay, so you have designed a board game. You made your prototype. I hope. It's fun. It's playing well. It's all like most of it's worked out. You've already figured out where I'm going to talk about this a little bit more later, but you've already figured out your dimensions for things, how many cards you need, if you need a board, like your component count, and things aren't going to change very much on the physical game from here. This is when you start thinking about hiring an artist, at least in my experience. Consider I know that everyone in the tabletop industry is very like pull themselves up, do it yourself, but consider not doing that. It depends. I've actually seen some artists like make their whole game and it looks incredible. I'm speaking in general terms here. So if you are an awesome illustrator / graphic designer / board game designer, then you get it. But if you're not, consider hiring some. I would say that Canva and AI art are not going to make it. It's not going to work. It's not enough on its own just yet. So when you're making a game, the most important part of your game is your game. So how do you make decisions when you're hiring artists that support the themes and designs of your game? If you're making a horror game, unless it's kind of an intentional juxtaposition, you don't want to necessarily hire an artist that does all cute Disney stuff and try to fit them into your style, unless they have some samples for that. Really make those decisions based on what's going to work. Like if someone has a portfolio full of like dark colors and dynamic compositions and things that really sell that genre, then those are the kinds of people you need to be looking for. Also think about where your game's going to end up. Is it a family game? Is it an adult game? Mass market? Is it a niche game? When you go to the stores, like when you go to a board game store, like, I love Madness games in Plano, Texas. When I go to Madness and I look at the shelf, like, where would my game go? Or I used to work a lot for mass market. So when I go to Target and I go into the family section, I'm going to put my rough sketch into that line. see if it fits and see if it stands out. Like we exist in a capitalist system where you're fighting for space on the shelf. So you would want to be thinking about that the whole time. And then just on a broad strokes, you're going to need to hire an illustrator, a graphic designer. It's not always just one, but I think if you're just starting out, just one of each. And then if you need miniatures, a sculptor, which is most of what I do now. But I have a part 2 for this section. I wish I had more pictures. I'm sorry. Life is hard. The game is the most important part of the game. I say that. I'm going to say that a lot. I think there's a line in here that says, show cool examples like Everdell. Think about Everdell is a game about a forest and making offerings for the seasons, and they have a cool tree board, and the art style is very like Wind in the Willows, and it's very, every choice that they made in the graphic design, in the component design, and in the what was I going to say? The illustration supports the theme that they're designing their game around, and it feels like it's a beautiful and cohesive piece. So that I didn't pull up a picture, but that's what I'm trying to get across. You want to establish a budget and a timeline. I don't have good numbers for this because I am not a board game designer. I have numbers for the hiring, like the general component costs, and numbers for what I would ask for in the past. Let's see. You be realistic. It takes a really long time to make board games. There's a lot of kind of drafting. Like you may not know that there's a problem until you've gotten something in and realize that it doesn't work with the rest of your components. So be realistic. Give yourself a lot of lead time to make mistakes. Hopefully this talk will help you not make as many mistakes. This is a side gig for a lot of people involved in the hobby. It's a side gig for me, like a labor of love. So that should be kind of included in your timing as well. I would also ask that if it's your first game, consider keeping it really simple, keeping the components simple to things that factories have done before, like very simple cards, game boards that are standard. Like you don't want to start making your own custom die lines and stuff on your first try, unless you've done it before. It just adds a lot of complexity where if you had just gotten that game on your belt and learned all the other ancillary things that come with that, then your next project can be the hard one. The other thing is like managing multiple artists. Sometimes character artwork can be a real nightmare. So working with lots of characters can be difficult because it's really hard to make them look appealing. So if you don't have a lot of budget to hire somebody who's good at that, you might run into some issues with appeal, and it might make your game look less professional than if you just had kind of a slick card game or something like that. Just some ideas that I've had. The more projects you have in your belt, the easier it'll be. That's that. I'm talking a lot, which is good. These are some clip arts from Clip Artino, which I might go buy because they're hilarious. Anyway, hiring artists. My rule number 1, because this is 1, not 2. Be nice to work with. Work with people that are nice to work with. If you are kind and respectful, communicative, you're going to go really far. And it's a tiny industry, like very small. Everyone talks to each other, and we're just here to have fun and make games at the end of the day. So being kind and respectful is number 1. That's going to, even above all, like when you're working with artists, someone who responds quickly, which is not me all the time, but someone who responds quickly and is very kind and takes feedback well, I would consider that over a lot of skill points. So keep that in mind, I guess. So where do you find them? Where are all the artists at? I love Tabletop art and design. I see great artists as a Facebook group. I have links at the end of this. So those links will be coming. But that's my favorite place to find board game artists and to send people to, because I see just a good amount, like 2 or 3 awesome painters posting there every day, showing their work and asking for work. So, and other 3D art groups on Facebook, or other concept art and 3D art groups on Facebook are really good too. People are always looking for jobs and looking for work in those. Just general networking. I got a lot of the work that I got by meeting people at Gen Con and then talking with them after the show. ArtStation is great for 3D artists and illustrators, but I see a lot of miniatures artists posting on there. Behance is really good for graphic designers, but cold calling people is tougher than kind of talking to people in more specific groups. But that way you can kind of find samples of art you really like, and then take those to other artists. It's harder to cold call people, but it can be worth it to find the person that is exactly the style you want, if you can get them. The best way to do it is to find a few artists that are consistently producing artwork that match the style that you want for the game. I work in commercial, like in big companies, and we're always trying to make in-house artists sort of fit a style, but it's really the best to find someone who's already doing that and just hire that person if you can. But you can't always, which I'll get into later. Ideally, they've shipped commercial projects before, like at least one game, because finishing stuff is hard. Like taking projects with like 30 illustrations or models or whatever to the finish line, it takes a lot of discipline. It's difficult. You don't want to hire someone who's never done it before, unless you have someone to help them that's already done it. It's I don't want to say you never want to do it, but it's difficult. It's like a tightrope to walk. It can be harder. Go out of your way to build connections with artists and other publishers. Same thing I said earlier. Networking. So important. I have some archetypes, and normally I wouldn't. Stereotypes are bad, but I'm going to use them because I think it's kind of how I break down my philosophy of artists and where I fit. And it isn't like to celebrate or to shame anybody, because all these people have different strengths. And it's really just to kind of put some perspective. So you have your rock stars. I would consider a rock star board game artist to be like Quantai Moria, who illustrated Calico, the Calico artist. I can't remember her name. Help me out if you can. There are some other artists that are really good. Vincent Dutray is one of my favorite artists. He illustrates everything, like tons and tons of board games. He has a very specific style, but that's somebody who has shipped a bunch of games. They're all gorgeous. Their name is going to boost your game into outer space, but you're just starting out. You can't afford them. They're booked out for a long time. So that's the rock star. Ideally, you want that, but we all live in the world, so you can't always get that. I would consider myself to be in kind of the second category, but I'm starting to get, just because I'm so busy, I can act like the first category. The workhorse artist is kind of a generalist. It does a lot of things. They're often the people that companies hire to be in-house because they can kind of pick up and put down projects in various stages of completion. So the pros to your workhorse artist is your game's going to get done. They know all the key points for manufacturing. The price is usually more affordable. If you're new to board games and this is your first design, it can be really good to offset your inexperience with somebody who is more experienced, because you might have some manufacturing questions or something that will be hard when you're interfacing directly with vendors because of the language barrier. But if you hire, someone with a lot of experience who's done it before, they can fill in your gaps in knowledge. So I'd recommend that a lot, actually, if you can swing it. The cons is that a workhorse artist is someone who has to draw in a lot of different styles, but they might not have exactly a nailed down look or a consistent look. It may not match the style you want perfectly, or it might not have the visual impact that you were hoping for, but it's done on time, and you had it was a lot easier to get it done. And then I have a baby artist, which is just a new person. And it can be really good to hire new people, especially if you see potential in them, which I've done before and have had a lot of good experience with. But if you're new and they're new, it could be really difficult. They might have the lowest rates in this list of people, but hopefully not less than $30 an hour. I'm watching you. Ask for more money. Let's see. But sometimes they're often really good or really talented. And just breaking in. But if there could be issues if you don't know how to handle something and they've sent some work that's not in the correct file format, or if they're a sculptor and they've sent in stuff with a lot of breakpoints and gaps, like things like that you wouldn't know how to handle and they don't know how to handle, that can be confusing. So that can be difficult, but there's pros and cons to all of these. Just think about it like that if you have to use the stereotypes. But usually people are kind of a mix of all three of these things, or different categories that I didn't even mention. Paying artists, we have rent, I can't pay my rent and exposure. Please pay us. I would say that half up front and half on completion is a good practice, not only because it's a guarantee for them, but it's hard to get motivated sometimes if you've been working on a project for 6 months and not seeing any money from that project, and that could be difficult. I'm going to talk a little bit about money, but in the last year, prices have gone crazy, so I'm hoping that everyone is charging more. Covers in the before times, I'd see artists charging $1,500, $2,000 for like really high performers. I'm sure it's more. It could be probably up to $5,000. It's worth it to hire a more experienced artist for your cover, even if you have to split it. Hire the more experienced person for the splash art, like the really good painter, and then hire a less experienced artist to do the component art. I think that's probably how I would handle it if I had a limited budget. And then the kind of everybody's winning. That less experienced artist is getting into the industry. They're getting experience. You're assuming less risk because you've got your splashy, handsome box art. It's a good way to be practical, but also like kind of share the wealth, I guess. Let's see. Component artwork varies a lot, and it varies a lot on the complexity required. I'm talking about illustrations here. You're still going to need a graphic designer to go through and make all the text legible and make sure it's accessible. And there's a lot of considerations there that you might not consider if you're doing it by yourself. I'm just speaking on the side that I know on and talking about money specifically to give you an idea. It could be 100, it could be 500, it could be more. I can talk very specifically about 3D. A 3D model for me of a person starts at 500, and then the more complex it goes, the more I add. And then if it's like a monster, I'll charge 1,000. It just depends on how much time I spend on it, and then I'm using all of my fancy equipment, which could break at any time, so that's kind of priced in, and my years of experience, I guess. But just to give you an idea, I want to be specific about these things, even though they're going to vary a lot based on where you live and what style you're asking for. I talked about we've all got, if you live in the US, you might have student loans. There's a lot to take in. I personally like when people kind of bring me on as a stakeholder. If it's a crowdfunding campaign, hey, if this crowdfunding campaign reaches this certain amount, we're going to give you a bonus of X. That's a really good incentive. Like making the artist a part of the process and giving them an incentive, I think is a really good practice. So just something to keep in mind. But I know having those ongoing expenses can be difficult. So that's really up to you. But I like that. Communicating with artists is super important. I think this is one of the hardest things. And feel free, I kind of glossed over a lot of the technical aspects here. But if you have questions, just reserve them at the end. I'll explain everything. And I've included links at the end for the design guides for Panda and Longpack. So you can kind of see what they ask you to set up for standard components and then send that to your artists. Let me drink water really quick. Okay. So one of the things that I have a pet peeve, and that's when I am moved onto a project and there are no die lines, no sizes, and I have to just kind of guess, and then they'll get the quote after they get the imaging, and then I have to change everything. I don't think that needs to happen, and I think it would save you a lot of money if you just had all those things before, and then when you hired on artists, you had that information at the ready, because it's going to waste people's time to have to adjust sizes, or suddenly the aspect ratio of something has changed drastically, and now you're like repaint, and you don't have to do that. It's pain. It doesn't have to be pain. It could be all easy street. Have detailed reference ready for what you're looking for. Don't be afraid to do like a post-it note sketch and rough it out and send it over. Like any kind of pre-visualization that you can send to get your artist on the same page is great and saves time, and they're usually not going to be offended by it. At least I wouldn't. Definitely having that saves a lot of time, and you can still leave wiggle room for them to add, the flavor, the artistry, but just communicating as closely as possible what you want is awesome. staging out the artwork, so you'd have different steps to check in instead of just like. And it depends. Like some projects is fine. Like if I'm just sculpting, like you could let me just sculpt because it's easy, and there aren't really other. I mean, there's stages, but it's not. It doesn't vary as much. But if I'm doing an illustration, I'm going to send you thumbnails. I'm going to send you like different options. I'm going to send you comps, like sketches, and then color options, just to make sure that I don't waste any time like going off in a direction that my client's going to hate. And I think it's important to check in. I mean, maybe not all, like don't check in every day, especially if you know that the person has like a full-time job, but kind of set a loose schedule so that you're always checking in and you don't spend months like not talking to each other and then you get something that you didn't want. Like try to keep control of that process, and don't let it get away from you. I've seen this happen a lot at big companies as well. That's not to be like passive aggressive, just sometimes just taking the simplest precautions can save everyone a lot of time. So, if you can be proactive and have this information ready when you're ready to hire people, it's going to make it a lot easier and they're going to want to work with you again. So before launch, I guess, did I skip anything? I don't think I quite skipped anything. But if you have more questions, feel free to ask. Something that I'm being asked to do a lot more lately, and you might notice when you're looking at crowdfunding pages, is that there's a lot of like animation and 3D rendering that goes on at the end. So like importing the entire board game into Blender with all the textures for all the artwork, sort of moving the camera around and making like nice turnarounds, things like that. The kind of things that you would do as a product designer, which is what I do, is becoming really common. So that's an expense you might have at the end. If you're crowdfunding, you want to get your manufacturing quotes before. I think that you should try to get them really early, like probably when you're done with your prototype. Sorry, I'm talking a lot and my throat's getting a little bit scratchy, but I'm good. I'm ready. Just the earlier you have that set information for what the final game is going to be and all the dimensions, better time you're going to have. And if you have early costing, it's going to help you. And you need it before you launch because you're going to have to price your Kickstarter and you have all these other expenses like marketing and everything. So I'm not going to talk about that because I don't know about that as well. But I know about working with vendors, get a lot of quotes. It's the same for artists. If you can get maybe 3 or 4 quotes and then sort of assess the experience levels and the portfolios, see what fits. Same for vendors or manufacturers. Get a couple of quotes. See if they have a portfolio of games that you've seen in real life that have nice print quality, and go with the one that is the best happy medium between quality and what you can afford. Because sometimes at that end, things can you have quality control issues. There can be art revisions at this stage too. You might realize that something is too expensive. You have to cut it. You might have to go, oh, I wanted this, but I wanted this plastic thing, but now it has to be a chipboard thing or something like that. And that can happen. And as part of the process, don't beat yourself up. If you watched and you listened to my advice, you planned as best as you could. But sometimes you have to make cuts based on costing. That's just the way it goes. I mentioned this already. You're going to need graphic design for the layout of the Kickstarter. It might be able to use the same person you use to design your game, or it could be you if you're good at that. You might need photography, or as I mentioned, 3D rendered imaging. I use Blender for that, and Blender is free, but it's heavy. Before you go to production, get physical proofs if you can, and samples, because digital proofing I haven't had good luck with it, and I always want to make adjustments to the print jobs. So what I try to do, and I don't know if this applies to freelance, but I'm just going to mention it, is I try to ship proofs from my end of stuff that I've printed to the manufacturer so that they have in person what they're using. You can also use, Pantone swatches for components, things like that, to make sure it's consistent. I wish I had made a whole slide about Pantone swatches, but I can mention it more later. Or, my social media is on bio, so hit me up and I can explain it in more detail. It'll probably take me forever. I don't want to get too into the nitty gritty, but the cost of getting those physical proofs is and the weight, if you can, try not to the lead times are long. It might be like 3 or 4 months, but if you can get that physical sample and approve it or make changes to it, it's worth it. It's always worth it. Okay, I'm coming up on the end now. Let's see. The future of art for board games. That yesterday, I've seen a lot in the board game groups lately. People posting their AI artwork and like other people panicking and fighting. I'm not quite in the panicking and fighting phase just yet. The robots are coming. I think the robots are pretty cool right now. I think as I would use it as an artist or as a designer, because design is such an iterative process in the early beginning, and it's just iterating on shapes and values and colors. I would use that tool to help me with, I know there's so many Mid-Journey posts, but I would use those tools to help me iterate faster. So like I'd still draw thumbnails, but then I'd be like, I'm gonna have this AI make like 40 more thumbnails for me and see if anything cool comes out of that. I don't think they're gonna take all of our jobs just yet. And I would, as a designer, be very careful with the licensing and attribution aspect of that. I'm sure that some of them are offering that, but I'm concerned about like where they're sourcing those images from sometimes, and then like how the ownership of those images is. So I'm sure in the future that will be clarified, and we'll see what happens. I'm not a maybe I'm a Luddite about some things, but I also a person who gets really excited about technology, so I think it's kind of exciting. And we'll see where that goes. But that's where I'm at. That's what I got. These are my resources: ArtStation, Behance, Panda, Longpack, and Tabletop Art Design are my favorites. I'm sorry, I lost my voice completely from the start of this talk to the end. But thank you guys. That's all I got. I hope that was helpful. It was fun.
Hey, that was super awesome. We're gonna kick the thank you panel though.
Thank you.
And hopefully we can get some questions from the audience. Audience, right now is your time to ask any questions you have of the wonderful Tatiana Quigley, who has been kind enough to grace us with her presence and give us a wonderful talk on not only the past or the present, but maybe even the future of art and tabletop. The robots aren't coming for your gerbs yet.
Yeah. I don't think so yet, but later maybe.
Maybe later, because I think there's definitely a soul that I find very much missing from a lot of the AI art. I mean, what it's really cool for is like textures that you can't really draw quickly. It just generates them real fast, and that's cool. But I really do think it's missing that je ne sais quoi, that soul, that piece of indelible fingerprint that an artist like Tatiana puts on it.
Weirdness is what I'm missing, and I'm like I generated a bunch of like scary creatures, and I was like, that's so weird. I love it.
Yeah. Well, that uncanniness, that uncanny valley that we hate when we're looking at Battle Angel Alita or something like that. We absolutely adore when we want to be scared, because it is it's preternatural.
Yeah, just don't ever look at a human face that AI makes. But
right.
I'm interested in it as a thumbnail generation tool. I will be incorporating. I will be incorporating it into my workflow as a designer for sure.
Yeah, I think you're spot on about the legality of it all. Whether or not it says that the final product is useful to you legally and usable by you legally, I would still be very, very concerned about source material. If it's not easily discriminated, or if it is easily discriminated, that source material is something else, right? I mean, I know many musicians who have gone to lots and lots of court cases because of sampling, right? This is like sampling, even with as much distortion and effects and whatever and backwards looping as you can do. There's only so many tones that the ear actually likes to hear. And so the same thing with art. There's going to be probably some interesting stuff as we get along here. So yeah, if there's any questions, please put them in the chat. We'll get to them. I actually did want to pick your brain a little bit, Tatiana, about
Mhm.
artists as part of the process. You had a kind of controversial take in a way, a little bit of a hot take, where I kind of think all the takes you have are like that because it's just kind of you. Um, if you don't follow Tatiana online, go and do it. It's she posts lots of cool stuff and art and doodles and whatnot. And when she goes live and does stuff live, it's real cool. But also, she has a very different way of thinking about the industry, which is great. And I think more of that needs to happen. There needs to be some people who push the envelope, some people who said, no, I can do it this way. And one of those ways is by making the artist a part of the campaign where they are getting something on the back end instead on the front end.
Right. That's not
Right.
my idea. It's just something that has happened to me that I'm like, well, thank you.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing because a lot of times in those professional forums, you see some artists saying, "No, don't accept that. That is like getting art now and paying for it later."
Well, the thing is, you still get paid. Like, I would never just accept a royalty
Hmm.
on spec or whatever. But if I'm asking for my regular fee, and then they're like, hey, what if you get a 3% royalty, or you get a $2,000 bonus if we hit X or something like that? That just helps to incentivize me and feel like I'm not just doing another job, I guess.
Yeah.
That's not my idea, and I don't need it. It's just something that I've noticed that I think is such a great idea.
Yeah, and I think it definitely works in the favor of people who do have maybe a social media following as well, where it's like, yeah, my 5, 10,000 followers are worth something if I'm going to spend the time to advertise to them because it
Mhm.
feels like an advertised thing, right? So I mean, maybe
Right.
there's that as well. It's like not only is it the skill, it's everything else that I'm doing around this that is getting monetized in some way. So yeah, it's an interesting thing. So I think you're right, Tatiana. When you say an artist needs to get their fee, get your fee,
Yeah, get
but
your fee.
then figure out, I've honestly taken a lower fee in order
Right.
to
Yeah.
get a
I
superstar
I
artist on a project,
yeah. Yeah. That's
right? So when you mention names like Quan Chai and Vincent and Beth and whatnot, I will actually take a cut in my fee in order to get an artist of that caliber on my games because their art sells.
I know.
Like
Yeah.
there's no two ways about it. When
Yeah,
you're
I felt
talking
a
about
little awkward about but that qualification scale is just so accurate in tabletop.
well, I mean, I think it's accurate in like unfortunately everything. There are going to be those superstar artists whose name and art style is like it when you look at it.
Mm,
And anything they create is like gold. It's like money, baby. And same thing with designers. Like there are gonna be designers out there who are those superstar rock stars, and then there's some other ones who are like more generalists. And I actually love the workhorse because the workhorse idea to me is like so. I don't think of myself as a superstar. I think of myself more as a workhorse designer, where I can go in and pick something up that somebody else has put down, and still make it
and get
with
it done. And it's
their
gonna be
vision
pretty good.
intact,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And I think we need a lot of those people in design and art because those superstars, unfortunately, they're really only good for those covers. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean that
No,
that's what they get paid for is that $5,000 piece, and asking them to take that and do like 120 cards, individual cards is like, well, there goes your entire budget for like
right.
everything,
And it's
the
not the
entire
best use of
game.
your time, and the image is like this big. But then
Right.
that's where you can sort of bring in the newer people. You see somebody, you're like, oh, I see a lot of potential in here. There's not that much risk if I give them a couple of cards, see what happens.
Hmm.
That's how you can kind of give back. And that's how
Yeah.
I
Have
think of it.
Have you done any art directing, Tatiana?
Kind of, sort of, like in house as a staff level person. I've done a lot of teaching and,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah, for
that
sure.
kind of thing. Yeah, but never like officially. But I'm
Can
very
you
pragmatic.
Yeah. Can you speak to what it's like to work under an art director and what kind of notes are you getting from them typically just for some of the maybe newer artists out there?
I usually, well, I work almost entirely. I mean, I do. everything. So I do my concepts, I do sculpts, I do my own sculpts off my own concepts. So normally that doesn't happen. But I'll get notes about my posing and dynamism. Like every artist has things that they're a little bit weak on. So for me, my strengths are like I'm great with faces. I'm really good with anatomy. I'm
Elf
great at making
ears,
like elf ears, appealing
the
elf
best elf ears
characters.
ever.
You could not do better, more anatomically correct elf ears. But sometimes my poses are a little stiff. Sometimes I'm in paintings. I'm not so good with like value structure,
Okay.
things like that. So I might get notes on just people catching like my weak spots or stuff like that, which is great because you can improve and identify. Like I'm always going to go out of my way if I see someone who's really good at things that I'm not good at to sort of buy some time with them. Like, hey, I'll pay you like $200, look at my portfolio, like help me out. And then I've gotten a lot better, a lot faster that way. You could do the same thing if you're a designer and you're like, I just don't know why this isn't working, but I feel in my gut that it's not working. Sometimes someone who has more experience with that can identify it like that and save you, I don't know, weeks of agonizing over something.
Months
Yeah,
sometimes, right?
months sometimes. Yeah.
That's a really good point. I like what you're saying about buying time with other creatives, because I think that's exactly how it should work. Like, if there is mentorship, get mentorship. Get it for free if you can, right?
Yeah, get it
But
for free if you can.
but what if you're like, hey, I've got a couple $100 that I was
Yeah,
going to spend on
sometimes I
something
just go,
else.
I like this artist. He has a Gumroad. Oh my God. Oh my God, he has mentorships. Oh my God.
Right. And sometimes they have slots that
Yeah,
like
exactly.
$50 for an hour of time or whatever.
Mhm.
And you're like, yeah, a
And
portfolio review is a big deal.
it's going to solve a lot of problems that you
Like
couldn't figure out.
if you're not from art college, like some of us have been to art college, uh, like portfolio review is huge, right? I never went to art college, but I was adjudicated for music for like most of my entire life, and it is a thing where you sit there and you take criticism and you get notes and you improve from those notes. And I think being able to pay somebody to objectively look at your stuffs and give you that, X number of hours that it takes to really do a nitty gritty breakdown of your portfolio and tell you, face up, this is where you're strong, this is where you're weak. Here's my suggestions for getting better at the stuff you're weak at. Go. That's
Yep.
worth 500, 200, whatever it takes if you want to improve at this profession, right? Um, so yeah, and I think there's a lot of people out there who, if they knew there was time available from people, they would do that. So you're saying Gumroad is
Yeah,
sometimes where
so
you look?
sometimes you can find it on Gumroad. Usually it'll be like I go to someone's Twitter page and then kind of dig around.
Yeah, and so a lot of people have commission sheets
Mhm.
on Twitter, where especially artists. Artists will have like open for commission, not open for commissions, but they'll always have a commission sheet where they list, how much it costs them for doing certain types of work, and you might find on there, consultation for X number of hours, right? So I mean, very, very openly, I asked Tatiana this morning, "Hey, what would it cost for you to sculpt a thing?" And she's like, "X dollars." I'm saying, "Cool, great." And given the rate and the hours, I'm saying, okay, that's probably about 7 to 10 hours worth of your time, blah, 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 blah. Makes total sense to me. Let's do it. Right. Or maybe let's not, or whatever it is. But go, if you like an artist, see if you can talk to them. Understand that sometimes it may take money because you're basically, if you're taking me away from my craft for an hour, I need to kind of make that up
I used to
if
not
my
be that
craft is
way.
my entire job.
I used to not be that way until I started noticing that my weekends were blocked out, and I was like, oh.
Right. I mean, and there comes a point where like I give away tons of time for free. I do. But I also have a job. I have outside of the industry job, right? And I think there's some of us who have that luxury, and some of us who just don't. And just respect that the people who don't may have to charge you because this is their livelihood. Whereas
Right.
my livelihood is on the back of, a whole college system where it's education. So
But it is worth, again, there will
mhm.
be, you might be stagnant on a project for a year, and buying that time will solve in that 20. I took a mentorship specifically with a guy named Devin Corwin, who's like a really good painter.
Mhm.
After kind of stagnating on my illustration for like a year or two,
Yeah.
I did 5 weeks with him, one time a week, and I got so much better.
I like painterly stuff.
Just painting, just illustration in general, like making complete images. Before
Like
that,
in
I
gen,
started,
just like
yeah,
everything. That's pretty
yeah,
awesome. Right?
so,
Because you
yeah.
noticed a weakness in one area and you probably ended up better in several.
Right. Just, buying time with someone who is really good at what I'm not good at.
And I think that's another thing that, just to mention, that when you spend money, it feels real.
That's true.
It's
That's
like I
true.
need to get something out of this.
That's true.
Right? Very cool. Any last minute questions from our group? We're about 4 minutes away from our final time. So if there's any questions from out there in the mentorship land, I know we didn't have tons of viewers today, but maybe we'll get more questions as we go on. If you have questions and you're watching this later, please do ask them in the Tabletop Mentorship Discord, and I'll funnel them to Tatiana through our DMs or whatever.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't know.
yeah, yeah.
She may
I
not
can join
answer,
it.
but
Yeah,
who
I can
never knows.
join it.
Yeah,
Just
she can
ping
also
me.
join our Discord. Why?
Yeah.
How come you're not on the Discord,
I
Tatiana?
didn't know. I didn't know about it. I didn't
Okay.
know.
So, I mean, here's the thing. I mean, this is maybe for next cycle. Would you ever be willing to take a mentee?
I mean, if they wanted to. Like,
Okay.
I would take it in areas where I'm really strong. Like, if you
Yeah.
wanted to do ZBrush mentor to like digital sculpting 3D,
Wow.
I would do that. I probably wouldn't. I would probably funnel you to someone else for illustration. Like, I'm a pretty good illustrator, but you know,
She's much better than she lets on.
But I'd rather take it in something that I'm like 100% like I know I'm good at this.
Yeah. I mean, strength to strength, right?
Mhm.
So, I think that we definitely, as we move on from it's mostly like board game design and RPG design and things
Right.
like that. We're getting now more of the not formal trades, I guess, but trades
So
in
you're
terms of
picking up
graphic
more. I would
design and
actually. I think
illustration and
that
sculpting
the
and things like
artist
that.
from Adventure Tactics also does mentorships or sometimes has mentorship slots, and I've seen him with interns on a game project we're working on together, and he is a phenomenal designer and a phenomenal teacher. So Jacob Croft is probably who I would funnel everyone to.
For illustration and such.
As long
right?
as you pay him lots of money, of course.
Yeah. And so for our mentorships are free. They're very short mentorships. So think about it. Consider that. It'd be nice to, I think, get you personally involved in mentoring. It's nice to see lots of diversity amongst the mentors as well,
I will
right?
definitely
So
be lurking in the Discord and answer
I
questions
will
when no
invite you
one
to
wants
that
me to.
Discord.
How about
There you
that?
go. She's real good at that, by the way.
Then I'll be
She's
yelling about art style.
sticking her nose into
Yeah.
things and
Oh, yeah.
yelling particularly yelling at me that I have no taste and I am a scrub
Absolute
when it comes
plebeian.
to like anime.
Only ranking of kings.
Only ranking of kings. Everything else I'm
fight.
pretty cool
I'll
on.
fight for him. Yeah, you're great at everything
Hey,
else.
I will fight for him too now because I love the story. Still not entirely sold on the art, but I appreciate what you taught me. See? I learned something. I'm coming into my 50th year of life and I can still learn because
That's
Tatiana
good.
is an awesome teacher.
I'm trying.
Excellent. Well, you know what? I think we're going to shut the stream down. But before we do that, let's chit chat a little bit, or let's at least show this. Come on, branding. This is going to be weird. I'm not sure what it'll do to our faces, but I'm going to press show and we'll see exactly what happens. We might get covered up. So here we go. Oh, yeah, I think parts of us are covered, parts of us are not. But
covered. But
yeah,
love
here we
Heather.
go. Yeah, Heather's awesome. Heather O'Neill. She is going to give us a talk on an A to Z guide of getting your RPG to market. I feel very American. I said Z instead of Z like a proper Canadian. That is going to happen on Saturday, August 27th. I'm not going to move, so you can't see my hand in the background. 2022 at 4 p.m. So that'll be a little bit earlier than this one. In Eastern time. That's great. Heather's going to focus on the business and production side of what it takes to bring an RPG to market, the options you have, what you have to do to make it successful, and what to do once your RPG is out there in the world. So we're going to talk about things like Zine Quest. We're going to talk about things like itch.io. We're going to talk about things like Drive Through RPG. We're going to talk about things like, hand stitching saddleback stuff and handing it out to your friends and photocopying it like in the olden days. So lots and lots of good stuff coming. And on that note, I would like to thank our guest, Tatiana, for coming on to the stream. And I'll get you an invite to our Discord server.
Awesome. Can't wait.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, everybody, for watching. And we'll see you in the Discord. Bye.
Bye.